WaterWorks was the park's seventh themed area when it opened in 1989, now known as Soak City, celebrating its 35th anniversary season this year. Hello, everyone. Alongside Ryan Sir, I'm Don Helbig, and this is Tower Topics.
Tower Topics is a podcast by Kings Island fans for Kings Island fans, because that's who we are, and that's who we care about. WaterWorks, man. Parks Water Park.
Yeah, I remember when that was announced. It was 1988. I was living in Louisville, Kentucky at the time, so I wasn't at the park my normal, 6-7 days a week that summer, but I would still get there, 3 times a week. But I remember when they announced that, and I really wasn't thinking too much about what it would be. I'm more at that time of the roller coaster fan, watching shows and that, so I didn't really put too much thought into it. But it's really turned out to be just arguably maybe the greatest addition the park has made outside of the Beast, because it really has become one of the most important things to a lot of guests when they think about buying season passes.
Yeah, it seems like it's a big season pass drawer. And honestly, we don't talk about this very often, but a lot of people that buy day tickets go almost exclusively to the water park. Let me ask you this. I know you weren't there for this, but you were, intermingled with Kings Island people. Do you think that the beaches opening in 1985 held any weight in this decision?
Well, they actually started looking at it in 1982, so it wasn't something that was, hey, this is going on across the street from us, we need to get on this. Mike Meadows, he was the finance director at Kings Island at the time. The general manager, Butch Bush. You had the marketing director, Tom Nallen. They were all talking about it in 1982. And they actually went to a water park convention to look at it, pitched it to upper management, the corporate team and all that, but didn't really get anything going on it. So back in 1982, that's what they wanted to do, but there just wasn't interest in it at the time.
Yeah, so they built it for a cost of $4.2 million, which seems like nothing. Even if you scale it up for inflation.
Well, nowadays,
but even if you scale it up for inflation, what would it be, about $12 million?
Yeah, it'd be around that.
That's like a couple flat rides, and they built a 12-acre water park.
Yeah, but my introduction to it was I saw the rendering that they put out there when they made the announcement. I remember, I heard that they were, looking at this going back to like 1986. The parks, PR marketing people would tell me, different things they were looking at. They would ask sometimes. They would, hey, if we were to do this, you think people would be interested, or is this something that would get you to buy a season pass? Just those kind of conversations would happen a lot. But I remember, being announced, and construction started in the fall of 1988. I didn't really, in my mind, I wasn't thinking. I just knew it was going on a corner of the park, but I didn't know where it was going to go or how it was going to impact some things. But I remember riding the train at Winterfest in 1988, and it had been rerouted to make way for the water park. Now, they had started this in the fall, so they had that done. Not a big window of time to reroute the train, and they had it done. But I just remember riding the train. I'm like, hey, wait a minute, that's not the way the train goes. And you saw bulldozers and things like that a little bit around the different Christmas decor and that you had. So that's when I realized where it was going to go.
Yeah. So, by the way, I just put into an inflation calculator. So, $4.2 million in 1989 is $10.4 million today. So I guess water parks just aren't terribly expensive to construct, to be honest with you.
No, but back when they were thinking about it, the idea that they had, when the finance director, Mike Meadows, his pitch was, hey, we get pretty busy on a Saturday and Sunday. What if we could take 10,000 of those people, put them in a water park, and that way the lines, for the Beast and the Racer and the Vortex, and all, maybe it's not going to, when Vortex wasn't there yet, but the Beast and the Racer, maybe it's not going to be as long. For our guests, but he just couldn't get anybody to bite on it at the upper level, and so here we are today. But back then the water parks were mostly standalone parks, so it wasn't really something that was part of the theme parks. So I can understand why there might have been some resistance to it.
So you mentioned that they were typically standalone, and it's funny because the transition has definitely been to the Kings Island model. Even if you look at Cedar Point, their Soak City, now Cedar Point Shores, for the longest time was pretty much separately ticketed, but now it's involved in several different season pass tiers and stuff. So when Kings Island wanted to include it with a ticket, was that controversial on the inside, or was that groundbreaking? I mean, how did people on the inside and the outside react to that?
Inside, they knew it was the right thing to do. You did. By that time, you had the beach, and there was another water park, Surf Cincinnati. So there were the other ones out there. So you were competing against that. Well, if you could include a water park that was, bigger and better than those two water parks as part of your admission, I mean, that was a great selling point for season passes and those individual ticket sales, that two parks, one price. So internally it was, very well received. But obviously those other two water parks, right away they knew that they had some pretty stiff competition there and it was going to be tough to keep up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, typically competition breeds pretty good stuff when it comes to these things. Surf Cincinnati over near your part of town, that ended up closing in like 2001 ish. We'll have to have Ronnie on the show to talk about that. And then the beach water park is currently in a state of limbo. It did not open for the 2020 season, and it's still standing but not operating. Don't go into it; they'll arrest you. But it may have a future, from what I'm understanding. But so it opened with 15 water slides of various configurations, with the tallest being 70 feet. Now, the tallest one being 70 feet, that was off the tower that currently has the racing water slides, right?
I believe so, yes.
Because that was like a vertical dip. I don't know if I ever rode that one or not, because that would be pretty terrifying, and I'd be exhausted by the time I got to the top.
Yeah, it was 12 acres and it was, pretty expansive for that time, and guests loved it. They liked being able to have that, the two parks, one price. I didn't necessarily love it because people would be in the water park and then they'd come over and ride the Beast and the Racer and they'd still be all wet from the water park and now the seats are wet. So for me, it wasn't, I wasn't enjoying that too much. But, it had a children's, water activity area, had a splash pool, they had the bathhouse, rental lockers, first aid center, a food stand, one food stand, and a guest relations center. So, for its time, it was spectacular and it drew a lot of attention.
Absolutely. So it started off being two parks for one price, as we discussed. I know that they fiddled with the idea of making it separate for when it became Boomerang Bay in 2004.
2004. A number of times it was discussed about making it a separate gate. But once you do something like that, you can't really go back and charge two different gates for it. There just would have been a lot of outrage. It would have really impacted season pass sales. It was set up the way it is, with the transportation to, via train, or you could walk down the path from the parks. It was set up to be something you could do, the two parks, one price there with that. But yeah, talked about a number of times, talked about during my years there that, is this the year we should make that a separate gate? That came up when, the beach was having some problems. If the beach doesn't open, is now the time that we can make this? So you couldn't do things like that, though, because it's what it had always been. It's a little bit different if it had always been, two separate gates and then you made it all one. That's a win for the community. That's a win for everybody, right? But you can't go the other way without outrage.
Yeah, this is probably I'm gonna walk you through the thought process of the executives that decided not to do this, and this is because I'm reading from the hive mind of way smarter people than me. They were thinking we can make them separate gates. Obviously more revenue, blah blah blah. We don't need to get into that. And then they were thinking, well, season pass holders and ticket holders are used to getting into both parks, two parks, one price. So what we can do is we can make it so a season pass is, let's say $100 just to make it simple. But a Kings Island only season pass is 80 and a water park only pass is 50. And they probably had the same thought with an individual ticket. Oh, you want the 2-ticket park? Then do this. And then they were thinking, people will either buy the pass that they already had, and then we have a bunch of tiers that don't make any sense because it's way too complicated. Or you're going to get people that are like, oh, Kings Island pass, $50, cool. Well, what do you mean I can only get into the water park with that? Yeah, that's what they were asking for by going for this decision. Now, here's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was, like I said, it wasn't something that was close to
No, no,
happening at
no,
any
no.
time that I know of. But it wasn't. I think everybody knew that it wouldn't be the right thing to do for a variety of reasons.
Well, I think that you can justify it. It's a lot like the whole. I'm not going to take a side on this, but the debate about the net neutrality thing, where it's kind of like the like basically, for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, internet service providers have the ability to charge more for things like Netflix and stuff like that, which is very taxing on the networks. And people are concerned, and rightfully so, that their bill is already $150. But if you want streaming services, that's an additional $30 a month. But the argument for it is also is, okay, my grandma wants to be able to use her iPhone, has no interest in streaming, but it's not cost effective for them to offer like a $30 tier when she could potentially get Peacock and stuff like that. So I kind of see the same value in it. If I come to the park, I pay $100 for a pass. I've got zero interest in the water park. Why shouldn't I be able to pay 80 for my season pass that doesn't get me into the service that I don't get? But you're adding to confusion, and you're adding to you know, essentially disappointment and stuff. But yeah, it seems like there were several times throughout history where it was, should we do it? And then it just never got very far. In fact, when they did Boomerang Bay, I believe that's when they put in what almost looked like turnstiles. They had the vertical like metal boxes, but they never actually did the spinning things. So it seemed like they had the infrastructure to do it if they ever wanted to. I'm not sure about that, but that's what it seemed like.
Yeah, and Boomerang Bay was one of the expansions of the water park. I mean, it's grown exponentially
Mm-hmm.
since 1989, but I loved it when they first rethemed it to Boomerang Bay. I remember going to the media day event. They had expanded the dining options there. More attractions were there. Took my daughter a lot. I mean, we couldn't get her out of the water park. We would take her to Boomerang Bay, but just a lot of memories there for me of that. I thought it was fantastic, and there was a reason why it was had that acknowledged reputation as the finest water park in the region.
So my memory from that media day, and it's such an atrocity that this was before like everything was filmed and everything was on tape and everything was pictured. This is 2004, so I had like an old Canon camera taking pictures on a compact flash card, but they wouldn't spring for Crocodile Dundee to show up, so they had his stunt double Ron Champion, and he flipped the switch to open Boomerang Bay. And do you remember what happened next? It could have gone far
I
worse.
I remember him being there, but not real clear on what happened next. I just remember there was all the gathering, everybody, and then he did the switch. But enlighten me, what happened? Remind
Remember,
me.
they had a small firework display and then a big
Oh
gust of
yes.
wind towards the crowd, and all the fireworks shot into the crowd. So I had pictures, and these are long gone to history, but it was he speaking, and then the next picture is he speaking with some sparks in the background. And then the next picture is like a haze, and then the next picture is just like a cloud with lights, like little dots of lights.
I was off to the left-hand side of where he was speaking, so I was a little bit out of that fray. So I was kind of like toward the back watching that. But yeah, that brings back memories.
Yeah, it was funny when we had Joe Rossi on the Attractions Group podcast. I think I was talking to him, and he distinctly remembered what had happened. Where, the thing about fireworks is there are points where you can stop the show, but if a firework's lit, it's going. Unless you want to run up to it and throw a bucket of water on it and try your luck with that. But they had this thing called a gerb, which basically burns with sparks. And, when the wind turns, that thing's going to keep burning until it burns out. And then it came directly at us. But yeah, that was my first media day, by the way. So that was really one of the bursts of my involvement with the park was Boomerang Bay's media day. But
I still have the cup. It was like a
I've got that
coconut
somewhere too.
kind of a thing that they give.
Yep.
Yes, I still have that.
Yep, I've still got that too. God, I wonder where that is. I cleaned out my storage locker sometime during the pandemic, and everything is in like totes and stuff in various like closets and so on. So I'll have to look through it because I definitely have that. Um, so one of my earliest memories of the water park is waiting in line for the flow rider attraction, Pipeline Paradise. Um, and I was a little kid. I had no idea what I was doing, but I saw all these like teenagers like doing spins and all sorts of cool stuff, and I assumed it was easy for some reason. And I went into it, and I as soon as I went down, I tumbled and got thrown to the back of it and stuff. But that was always a fun attraction. Honestly, I hadn't ridden that in decades. I'd probably forgotten about it, to be honest with you. But they removed that going into the 2023 season, right? Does that sound right?
Yeah, correct. And there was a lot of controversy about that, but we've talked about this many times on our podcast. Every attraction has, kind of an expiration date for the most part. Most of them do. And it was just, time. It needed a lot of work, a lot of repair, and you know, the decision was made. And there's always hard decisions like that that get made, and that was one of them.
Now, to be clear, as somebody that has experience on both ends of the table with water parks, um, first of all, I did enjoy the ride. So I was bummed too. It's one of those things where you can cast stones at me because I should have voted with my feet, whatever. But I thought it was really cool. That technology was first generation, very obsolete. Secondly, you mentioned that every ride has a shelf life. It's more so true with water rides. Because if you got a pipe under there that's leaking or something, you have to tear out the entire ride to fix the pipe. Or, and it's just, you get to a point where if you have to dig underground and stuff, it's just not viable. So Kings Island would be better off. Maybe in the future they will, but they'd be better off putting in a new generation one rather than trying to fix the one that they had.
Yeah, and it had its it had its following.
Yeah, oh certainly.
There were the regulars that would come there, especially on the weekends, that would do it. And every ride in the park is somebody's favorite, right? So when it comes time for that attraction to leave, there's always going to be people that are disappointed. Very much though, a very difficult decision, as they all are, and that's where we are with that.
Yeah, and so some people made the argument of like they never really had the opportunity to do their last ride and so on, but I don't pin this one on the park because it was probably they went to him and they said like, look, we're trying to open this thing. How much you want to put into it?
That happens.
Yeah. Oh yeah, certainly.
That happens at parks throughout the country. I mean, all over the country with parks where you hope that the ride continues. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and then it just, everybody looks at it and the decision has to be made. It just, doesn't make sense. We have to move on, and that happens. And you don't get to give, the fans of that attraction that chance for those last rides. So it does happen, and it's not isolated to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So just some fun facts about the original construction specifications of WaterWorks. 2.9 million miles, 2.9 miles of piping. Imagine if it was 2.9 million miles of piping. That would be a hell of a water park. That's like all of New York City.
Oh, it would be.
650,000 gallons of heated water, 65,000 board feet of lumber, 29,000 square feet of unistone. So unistone is the textured stuff that you walk on. It's not concrete. It's quite a bit nicer than that. 4,020 linear feet of fiberglass for the slides, 3,000 cubic feet of concrete, and 1,200 foot long Action River, which is my favorite part of the water park now.
Yeah. Now I want to mention real quick, and this hasn't gotten any attention really, and it's unfortunate because by the time the water park opens, nobody's going to know they did this. But from what I heard, they are redoing that whole, the base of that.
I've heard that too.
So it's going to have a whole new, floor to it. But when they fill it up with water, no one's going to know the difference between what it was. And there's a lot of work involved there. The Kings Island construction team, putting a lot of effort into that. So we want to make sure that they get recognized for what they're doing, all the work they're going to put into that before Soak City opens for the 2024 season, Memorial Day weekend.
It's surprising that they have to do that already since they did it when it became the Action River a couple years ago. They tore out the whole bottom then too. Which I don't know the regular maintenance schedule, but I imagine that's a little accelerated, which tells me that it was probably leaking or something, which has nothing to do with safety or anything like that. It's more like a nuisance of having to put more water into it all the time. Especially, so here's a little lesson on how water parks work. Don, you may not even know this, but I don't think this is true with the wave pools, but it's certainly true with the lazy river, the river rapids, whatever they're calling it nowadays. But the a lot of the water slides will use like that as the reservoir. So basically, what happens is they draw water from it. It shares a wet well with that, and it's just a more efficient way to build these things. The downside is, though, if you have problems with one, you technically have problems with all. Now, granted, like if this thing's leaking water, I mean, it's a big enough operation that they can fix it and do whatever. This is probably more preventative than anything. But if somebody has an accident in the lazy river, it'll shut down half your water park. So if you ever see, a bunch of water slides closed as well as like a lazy river or whatever, whether it's at Kings Island or Great Wolf Lodge or whatever, that's probably either that's what happened or it was like a pump failure, which is making it so they don't all work, but they're all very intertwined.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah. So you want to move on to the listener question?
Yeah, go ahead and read.
So this is from Xander. In what ways, other than receiving Firehawk, did Geauga Lake closing affect Kings Island? Great question, Xander. Don, why don't you start?
It is a great question. Geauga Lake closing, that was one of the first things I was involved with when I went to work at Kings Island, was that decision was made. I think when you look at, what is it? I think it's 70 miles or so from Cedar Point, maybe, from where Geauga Lake was. Not that far, a little over an hour drive, maybe. So how it affected Kings Island, really not, I don't think much, because Geauga Lake was more of the local, park. You didn't have too many people going from the Cincinnati area to Geauga Lake. Maybe if they went to Cedar Point or something, they might that one time a year. You didn't have a lot of them, the Geauga Lake area, residents and that weren't making too many trips down to Kings Island because they had Cedar Point right there. So I don't think it really had any major impact in that regard in terms of attendance or anything like that. It was nice to get Firehawk. I would have rather had Dominator, which is at Kings Dominion right now. But other than that, not too much impact. I think that, Cedar Point would have benefited a little bit more because there weren't any options. You could pick or choose, back in the day, which park you were going to go to. And it just kind of gave Cedar Point that whole territory up there.
I want to take a different perspective on what he's asking. I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. But when we're talking about how it affected Kings Island, it affected a lot of the Cedar Fair parks in the kind of the mega region east of the Mississippi, because I know that Kings Island acquired a lot of talent that was previously at Geauga Lake too. And I thought that was really, really impactful. So in some ways, we got Firehawk. That's something that's easy to see, but they're really smart people and really great people within the industry that work for Geauga Lake that had nothing to do with the fact that it ultimately didn't work out.
No, you're right. You're right. Those people did end up, coming to Kings Island or Dorney Park or Worlds of Fun and the different parks in the chain. So in that respect, yeah, I mean, it was impactful that way that, you were able to put this talent in those other parks.
Absolutely. But that's what I mean, obviously Firehawk's the first thing that comes to mind, but after that is definitely that they were able to take the talent that was capable of running a mega park where the mega park just never germinated from the seed that was planted. And they were able to take those people and spread them out. But thank you, Xander. Great listener question. Thank you so much. Hey, I'm Ryan Sir along with Don Helbig, and this is Tower Topics.